Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 24 April 2017. Before the camera you see a pair of Spydercos. On the left with the brown or flat dark earth handle is the Sprint Run S35 VN version of the vaunted Paramilitary 2, perhaps the most popular Spyderco knife ever made. On the right, you see the long-awaited Para 3, and that is the knife we are reviewing tonight. So let's get the Para 2 out of the way, and let's look at the Para 3. Boy, I'll tell you, the last 3 months, when I look at my YouTube comments, my emails, my text messages, the most common question I get ever since its release is, Rob, when are you going to review the Para 3? Well, I haven't bought one, and I've sort of been waiting for one to come in for sharpening, and lo and behold, I did get one about a month ago from my customer Sean, and he was very gracious. He shipped the knife in its original box. My favorite box ever. And he shipped it with the pocket clip not installed. This knife he has been carrying in the bottom of his pocket. But he said, Rob, go ahead and put the clip on however you would like and go ahead and carry this knife and use it. And I did for a couple weeks before I sharpened it. Of course, now it's wearing a stunning half-micron polished edge. And yeah, do I need to tell you that it cuts? It cuts. So this really isn't going to be a from the sharpening bench video. It's going to be the full review of the Spyderco Para 3. So, first of all, what is it and why does it exist? Well, you guys know the military family of Spyderco began with the Spyderco Military, a 4-inch bladed liner lock. Kind of a big knife for EDC, kind of a pocket hog, but still a great cutter. That was followed by the Paramilitary, which was a smaller version of the military, but with not only a smaller size, but the compression lock, which I believe was found in the Superleaf, and gosh, you guys help me out, there was another one. Also the Yojimbo 2 used a compression lock. The Paramilitary had a couple of ergonomic issues in its first iteration, and it was followed up a couple years later with this knife, although it came in a black handle and a camouflage handle with S30V blade. This is the Paramilitary 2, revised and enlarged 50-50 choil, and the horn at the pommel area of the knife was sort of rounded out and to give the hand more room. And for years, the Paramilitary 2 was the cash cow for Spyderco, and for good reason. As a 3 7/16 inch blade, stock thickness is 146 thousandths. It is very thinly ground in its primary bevel, and also has a lot of distal taper, so it comes to a really fine tip. Just a superb EDC/smaller tactical knife. The only complaints we really ever heard about the Paramilitary 2 were because of its attempt at a non-adjustable, crank it down to full tightness bushing pivot, which when it's properly done looks like this. Free swinging blade with no play, but there was lots of variability in the mechanism. Some of them came with great action, some of them came tight, and some of them came with blade play. That was one complaint that seemed to plague the Paramilitary 2. The other one, the handle's so darn big. With that 3 7/16 inch blade that gives you about 3 1/16 inches of cutting edge, the handle is like 1.5 inches longer than the blade. So almost 4 7/8 inches long. Really long. And kind of a pocket hog, you know, it sort of has a large pommel area, butt end of the knife's kind of big, and kind of wide top to bottom as well. So, you know, a lot of people were clamoring for a smaller version of the Paramilitary 2 that didn't take up so much pocket and maybe with about a 3-inch blade. Well, finally we got it. Here's where it gets a little confusing. We have the military, then we have the paramilitary, and a second version called the Paramilitary 2. Well, what did we call it when we made a paramilitary but smaller? Was it going to be the Paramilitary 3? No. How about just the Para? No. It's the Para 3, which will confuse me until the day I die. It's not the third version of this size in the military family. It's the first version of the 3-inch length military family knife, but we call it the Para 3. Maybe it's for 3-inch. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to make much sense. I guess most of us figured, because a lot of us call this the Para 2, this doesn't make sense being called the Para 3 because it's not really the same size knife at all. But anyway, that's kind of a silly point. It is pretty much what everybody wanted. It is a 3-inch version with a smaller handle, much smaller and more svelte in that butt end area of the knife. Carries much better. Still has plenty of usable blade. If you can use a sage for everyday tasks, you can certainly use the Para 3. Dimension's pretty much the same, although I think this still has a little longer handle than a sage. The mechanism is identical. The only construction difference in the two knives you're going to notice is the stop pin. I talked about the varying action of the Paramilitary 2. And the screws that hold the stop pin in and hold the frame sides together, how tight you made these stop pin screws had a great effect many times on the action of the knife. And you know, the proper way, I guess, to adjust the pivot, or to get the pivot as good as it could be on these, was to loosen the stop pin screws so they were not pulling the frame in at all. Get the pivot how you want it. Sometimes you could lock it down full tight, sometimes you had to play with it. And then you'd slowly sneak these stop pin screws in until you felt the action start to change, then you back them off a little bit. To avoid that level of confusion, the new stop pin on the Para 3 is just a shouldered pin that sticks through the sides but has no clamping force on the frame. So it can't confuse the action of the knife, I guess is the best way to say that. The problem with that, and you can kind of see it, if I don't put any pressure on the offside scale and I just pinch that compression lock, the blade drops really freely. But the minute I start to squeeze that frame side, I lock up my action. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. The frame on the Paramilitary 2 / Para 3 is very flimsy. You can move it a lot just by how you compress it as you're holding it. And this floating stop pin, I don't know, it almost makes that condition worse in function. But, you know, it's a small thing. Your hands sort of get used to how you have to manipulate that to get a free swinging blade. Bushing pivot, same as the paramilitary 2. In fact, if we sort of lay these knives over each other, we'll look at a couple of areas here. Put the black knife in the back. Okay. So we've got the fronts of these knives completely lined up. And look at this. The para 3 absolutely disappears back there. They're identical back to about this point right here. Identical. And then this back finger groove is a little less steep. And of course the horn is even smaller than it was on the paramilitary 2. So the butt end of the knife much slimmer, which, you know, should make the knife more pocket friendly. And, you know, really there's not much to say in commentary on the ergos or the performance of the knife. When you're in this grip, the forward choil saber grip, your hand really can't tell which knife it's holding. I will say, I guess that's not true. We have a pretty sharp downward curve back here, where it's much straighter on the paramilitary 2. So it does feel a little more anchored in the hand, this surface against the pad of your palm. But other than that, they feel really, really similar. Now when you're back in the rearward choil, the pinky will be hanging out on the other side of the horn for most people with large hands, which isn't a bad thing. That actually gives the knife a lot of security with a small handle. The paramilitary 2, it's a little pinch, but all 4 fingers go in front of the horn. Okay, one isn't necessarily better than the other. Now let's look at the hammer grip. That's probably going to feel almost the same. It feels really the same. If we go hammer grip up front, laying that thumb along the front of the frame, that's really secure. Feels the same. Draw cut grip feels identical. And here's where the big difference will be in the reverse grip. Back in the rearward choil, thumb wraps, this point is a little uncomfortable. Go to the paramilitary 2. That point, because it's offset to the spine side, it sort of wraps into that thumb knuckle a little better. But they did a really, really good job of scaling down that handle. They didn't make it identical but smaller, especially at the back, because they had objectives to accomplish with the back of that handle to make it more pocket friendly. But it still works in a variety of grips very, very well. No complaints there. We all know about the strength of the compression lock. We know about the sweetness of the action if you get one of these things set up right. The cutting ability, because of the vertical and distal tapers, is excellent. Spyderco sharpens them at 15 degrees per side. Secondary bevel with a 20 or so, tiny micro. And when I resharpen them, that's exactly what I do. All I do, really different than the factory, is give it a little more precise edge, polished edge, and then I finish the cutting edge back to the 90-degree plunge. People ask me all the time, Rob, how do you do that? Well, it's not rocket science. Very sharp stones, and I just pay a lot of attention as I'm working through my grits on getting right up to that shoulder. Just takes a little patience. Easy to do. And of course, it takes a great edge. Perfectly consistent thickness behind the edge, tip to hilt. One of the claims to fame of Spyderco blade grinding. Now, we've talked about all the ways this knife is good, all the ways that it's like its predecessor, in many ways very good. What do I think they could have done differently on this knife? Well, since we were going smaller, partially to make it more pocket friendly, I'm not sure I would have used as broad of a blade. Again, let's lay one over the other. Look at that. The top of the blade spine and the spidey hole are in exactly the same place. I think we could have used a blade that was less broad top to bottom. It wouldn't look so stubby, and it might provide a little bit smaller presence in the pocket, which would be good. So, yeah, that might have helped a little, making a more carryable para. So a little bit of a hit there, but the big hit, a big hit. When you look at the back of this knife, and I'm not going to be the first one to raise this. It looks like they took a rain barrel size lanyard tube and built a tiny knife around it. I've always thought that the lanyard tube on the Paramilitary 2 was too big. It doesn't need to be that big. You're not going to use any kind of cordage in that knife to make a lanyard from that requires a lanyard tube that large, and it almost looks out of proportion big even in this rather large handle. They use the same diameter tube in the Para 3, and because they really streamlined the butt end of this handle, there's one place it could go, right in the end, leaving no room for a clip mount next to the lanyard tube, as you see on the Paramilitary 2. So the clip needs to be mounted a lot farther down the handle. A lot farther down the handle. So instead of having, let's measure these. How much knife sticks up out of the pocket? So this almost 5-inch handle has 7/8 of an inch sticking out of the pocket. This 4.5-inch-ish handle has over an inch, almost an inch and a 1/16 sticking out of the pocket. Now, I don't know, I don't like it. It looks silly, and that's a lot of knife sticking out of the pocket. A lot of knife to knock into stuff, to get snagged on stuff. I don't know, and it doesn't look right. Why couldn't we have used the lanyard tube from a Sage or from a Gale Bradley that's half that big, moved it back over here to the spine and snuck that clip up where it belongs? Could have been done. I just think, and I hate to use this coarse of language, but Spyderco just kind of screwed the pooch on the back of this knife handle. It's just not attractive, and it doesn't make much functional sense either. There's a lot of unattractive about Spydercos that we've forgiven over the years because the knives are so doggone functional. But when you got ugly and less functional all at the same time, that's not good, and it's not Spyderco-like. Just kind of surprised by that. But those are it, guys. Those are the two things, the two and only things. I would have preferred the blade be proportionately less broad, and I would have preferred a much different design going on back here. Even I hate to say it because I don't like this clip, but even the deep carry paperclip clip and a smaller lanyard tube side by side would have been a big improvement over this setup. I don't know though, because being a lefty, I need the clip to properly fun flick the compression lock. I got to anchor on that, and the paperclip clip just moves all over the place when you do that. So I don't know. These are running like $6 or $7 less than an S30V Paramilitary 2. So about 120 bucks versus 127 at Blade HQ. And I would assume this knife is going to be very successful, and we're going to see varieties of handle colors, blade finishes, blade steels, the normal stuff. This is probably a knife that can't miss, but maybe a Para 3-1 with this done better would be a good next step for Spyderco. But all in all, it's kind of what we wanted, isn't it? It's kind of what we wanted, Spidey fans. Not a bad effort at all. My prediction, home run, sales and marketing. That's all for this one, my friends. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word and my Spideys are sharp.